Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. Listen diligently.
The truth behind Hanukkah that the devil doesn't want you to know. The truth behind Hanukkah that the devil does not want you to know. Now that's a rather pretentious sounding title. But after, I have it right here. It blends in really well. That's a rather pretentious sounding title. But once you find out what I learned about Hanukkah, that I don't think any of you know. We maybe had a little sense of this, but you don't. I don't think any of you know this. If so, I think I would have heard about it by now. You're going to say, "Wow, this is exciting." Makes me actually want to get in and kind of celebrate Hanukkah. It's kind of funny because last year I was questioning Hanukkah because there are some local Messianic Bible teachers. In fact, somebody sent me a video last year after Hanukkah, or a link, and they said, "Oh, you probably shouldn't be doing Hanukkah because it's part of the sun worship thing." And I watched their video, and I go like, boy, he's got some good points. Well, I wasn't sure what to think about it. And I said, I need to study this out a little bit more, and then time went by and I never did. So I am studying the origins of, I'm studying about Christmas. Okay, Christmas is old news to me. It was old news back 50 years ago. It's not old news for most of you or a lot of people, but it is for me. But let me give you a little bit of background. Prior to Halloween, I put up a post on my blog from a guy by the name of Michael Snyder, who's a Messianic, and he has a website called The End of the American Dream. He's got several websites. And he wrote a piece called 18 Reasons Why I Don't Celebrate Halloween. And I link over to other articles from time to time, and I put them on my on my blog with posts or with attribution and a link back to the website. And I was shocked. I had about 3 or 4 times more people that hit me that day, and for the next several days, because of that post, than I had ever had on my blog in several years of having my blog. I was shocked. I go like, wow. And it wasn't even anything I wrote. I said, there's a need here. I had one day I had 1,200 hits, and then I had 1,800 and some odd hits. A normal day for me is 250 to 350, 400 views a day on my blog. It went ballistic. I go, there's a real need here. Okay, great. I'm going to list, umpteen reasons why I don't do Christmas, whatever, umpteen reasons, and I started coming up with lists, which I'm going to put on my blog. Well, as I was studying, because a lot of people see Christmas, when they come to the Hebrew roots, understanding, they get all excited about Hanukkah. Because in their mind, it's a Christmas substitute. And it's not. I mean, all around us in the Hebrew roots movement, we got people putting up Hanukkah bushes and putting up Hanukkah lights and putting up Hanukkah this and Hanukkah that and exchanging gifts and getting all excited about Hanukkah. Some of them don't get half as excited about Passover and unleavened bread and Yom Kippur especially as they do about Hanukkah. And it's because has become a Christmas substitute. The problem is, as Hanukkah and Christmas are traditionally celebrated, Hanukkah cannot compete with Christmas. I read a blog by a Jewish man, a religious Jewish man recently, and he says, this business of Christmas competing with Hanukkah, look, Hanukkah, and he didn't do Christmas, he did Hanukkah, he was Jewish. He says, look, face it, we cannot compete with Christmas. I mean, the music of Christmas is better, the decorations are better, the food is better, you get all these gifts, that's better, and all the culture, everybody goes ape all over Christmas. He says, look, we can't compete with this. We just have to enjoy Hanukkah for what it is. And then he got into the history of it a little bit. So I was reading a lot of different websites, and so I decided to put down a list of how Hanukkah is not a substitute of Christmas. And that's going to be my next teaching I give. I've got 13 reasons why they're different. But in the process of coming up with lists to put on my blog to hopefully get that information out there and bring in more readers and all that kind of thing, because when you're doing internet stuff, you gotta use the bait to catch the fish, and you bring them in, and then hopefully they'll get exposed to other things. So in the process of pursuing that, because of this Halloween blog I put up, I came across some information. Somebody put a paper out there, and then I studied out and added some more to it, as I often do. So all of that as a background, the truth behind Hanukkah that the devil does not want you to know. So to the casual observer, Hanukkah is simply a Jewish holiday that occurs around Christmas time and has something to do with the lighting of menorahs or a menorah-like candelabra, and it has something to do with something that the Jews did way back in history in their temple or whatever, and that's about all most people view as Hanukkah. That's about all most people know about Hanukkah. Some people, as I mentioned before, even go to the point of saying that we shouldn't be doing Hanukkah because that's really no different. It's a festival of light and Christmas, which was originally comes out of paganism, was a day to celebrate the turning of the moving away from the winter solstice, and so 25th of December, the days are getting longer, and so it's all about sun god worship. Okay, bottom line, we're not going to get into all that. You can go look up Christmas, origins of Christmas on Wikipedia, any encyclopedia. There's probably millions of links out there you can go to on the internet. But the point is that as we will go and see below, Hanukkah has nothing whatsoever to do with the sun god. And I'm going to prove this from the scriptures and from the book of Maccabees. Okay? Those two sources. You're going to see something in the scriptures you never saw before. I never had seen it. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. We're also going to see Hanukkah and Christmas have something in common. This is like the only thing they have in common. They both celebrate the Messiah's incarnation. However, Hanukkah does it from a foundation of scriptural truth and without all the paganism mixed in. And I'm going to prove that one from the Bible too. And it does it much better than Christmas. Therefore, and without all the pagan trappings. Therefore, if you want to celebrate the incarnation of Yeshua, notice I didn't say birth, I said incarnation. I'll explain. Hanukkah, even though it's not commanded, but if you feel the need to do it, that is the time to do it. In fact, I would say that there's more precedence biblically for doing it now than even at Sukkot, when we typically celebrate his birth, which there's nothing wrong with that either. But I'm saying, from a biblical perspective, Hanukkah is the time to do it. Let me explain. You know, as you know, if you barely scratch the surface of Christmas and the origins, you barely scratch the surface, you'll see that it has its origins are profane, ungodly, vile, demonic, and unbiblical. Christmas is the Christianization of some vile pagan traditions that are based on celebrating the winter solstice in honor of the demonic sun god. Whether you want to say Jupiter, Apollo, Baal, whatever. The pagans had all different kinds of names for the sun god. Ultimately, it's Satan the devil, okay? And they did this, they celebrated through lewd, drunken, orgiastic, satanic rituals. You've heard the terms, the Roman holidays of Saturnalia. Oh, I guess Saturn was one of them too. Saturnalia, Brumalia, and the rest of them. We're not going to get into that. And then, of course, the origin of the Christmas tree came later. Although, in other words, the Catholic Church brought Christmas into Christianity in about the 5th century. In the 400s sometime. I want to say the late 400s. And a little down the road somewhere, the Christmas tree came into it. And that's more of Germanic origination from the pagan Germans. But if we delve into this, we see that the concept of the tree, though it may not look exactly like the traditional Christmas tree that most of us are familiar with, but the concept of the tree goes back to the concept of worshiping either in a grove of trees or next to trees. In the Bible, you hear the term groves. Groves are Asherah poles. Asherah was the female sex goddess consort of Baal or Baal, the Canaanite god and goddess, and that Asherah or Ashtaroth would be plural. That's where the term Ishtar or Astarte or Easter come from. All these, you've heard of Isis and Osiris. They're all different names for the same god and goddess. And it all involves sex worship, god and goddess worship, and sun god worship. And it's a total opposite of what the Bible teaches. And the Bible roundly, totally and completely commands us not to get involved in it. It's wickedness, it's witchcraft, it's sorcery, it's paganism, and all that stuff. And we see descriptions of the precursor to the Christmas tree in the scriptures. The Asherah poles, the groves where they would go and have sexual rites and worship the fertility of the earth and through the trees, and they would and evergreen trees, and sometimes they use palm trees, and they would have trees on poles, obelisks. They were phallic symbols, and it goes on and on and on. And that's the part of the origin of the Christmas tree, and of course the Christmas tree. The central theme of the Christmas tree now of Christmas is the Christmas tree, and so these things are rooted in pre-Christian sex worship rituals and demonic sun god worship, which the Bible condemns and forbids the saints from practicing. Now, Hanukkah, on the other hand, doesn't share Christmas's pagan origins. Rather, Hanukkah links back directly to one of Jehovah's 7 commanded festivals. Let me repeat that. Hanukkah links back directly to one of Jehovah's 7 commanded festivals, biblical feasts. I bet you didn't know that. Or if you did, you maybe had a kind of a foggy idea of it, but I'm going to go into more details. It's a wonderful truth. Unlike Christmas, it takes its roots out of the pagan sex god, sun god worship ritual. Hanukkah traces itself back to the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, Hanukkah isn't a commanded biblical holiday, but it's a holiday of man's creation. But it still has prophetic implications that are absolutely astounding, and we're going to talk about that. And what's more is it doesn't carry the pagan baggage that the Christian holidays like Christmas and Easter and Lent and All Saints' Day and all these other ones have. not so much in evangelical Christianity, but you get back to the mainline denominations of Christianity, back to Orthodox Christianity, back to Roman Catholic Christianity, and they have all kinds of paganistic holidays. Now, in our study of the origins of Hanukkah, let's first prove that there is a link between the fall festival of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, and Hanukkah. Now, the Feast of Tabernacles, as all of you know, but this is for the benefit of the people on YouTube, there are 7 biblical feasts, and they're all outlined in Leviticus 23, among other places in the Bible. And the Feast of Tabernacles is the 6th of the 7 biblical festivals that happens in the fall. Three of the biblical feasts happen in the spring, and 4 of them happen in the fall. And the Feast of Tabernacles lasts for 7 days, and then immediately after that is the 8th day, Shemini Atzeret. So between the 2 of them, they both last for 8 days. So how is it that Hanukkah links back to the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, interestingly, many of us have read the book of Maccabees, the first book of Maccabees, where it talks about the Maccabean revolt and how the Maccabees, this Jewish priestly clan, how they rebelled against the Greeks, who were trying to impose pagan culture over the Jews who were living there, that had come back from exile out of Babylon sometime earlier. And we're looking at about 160 BC or so, roughly 160 years before the birth of Yeshua, when this was occurring, and actually a little bit before that. And the Jews were being forced to assimilate with the pagan Greek culture. And that meant that they could not circumcise their children. They could not read the Torah. They were being forced to eat swine, among other things. And after a while of this, and some of the Jews were going along with it. You know, better if you can't beat them, then join them, kind of a thing. And yet there was this one priestly family said enough was enough, and they rose up and they formed a rebellion. By this time, the Greeks had taken over the temple in Jerusalem, and they had sacrificed a pig on the altar, and they put up a statue of Jupiter in the Holy of Holies, and they totally desecrated and profaned the temple, to the great consternation of this priestly family, the Maccabees. So the Maccabees, this is called the Maccabean revolt, and the Jews rose up and literally in righteous indignation, they kicked the Jews out of the Romans or the Greeks out of the land, defeated them in a number of battles, supernaturally defeated them against overwhelming odds. And then we read about this in 1 Maccabees, starting in chapter 1. And Dr. Joe last year or the year before did a wonderful teaching on that. You can go back on the YouTube channel, go back through our videos, and you'll come on that teaching. So I'm not going to go over that again, but you can find the history of Hanukkah on that excellent teaching that my compatriot Dr. Joe did. But what most people don't realize is how Hanukkah came about and why. You have to go to a little bit later in 1 Maccabees and also in 2 Maccabees. Now, Maccabees is not a biblical book. It was written, it's a historical book. It's not part of the canon of Scripture. But it is one of the books that's recognized to be authoritative, not inspired, but historically accurate and authoritative. And it was written in that period of time between Malachi and Matthew, or Mark, whoever was written first there in the Gospels. I think Mark was maybe the first one, if I remember right. But it is that several hundred-year period between the two, the Old and the New Testament. It was written in that period of time. And it's recognized to be authoritative. And some people actually do include that in their Bibles. But it is not considered to be authoritative by Jewish scholars. As far as inspired, that is. Though it's not part of the canon of Scripture, but it is authoritative. It is recognized to be accurate historically. So we get this information from the book of Maccabees, and I'm not going to turn to it, but in Maccabees 4, verse 44 through 59, and 2 Maccabees 1, verses 7 through 9, and then 2 Maccabees 10, chapter 10, verses 1 through 8. It shows there that, in fact, it says that Hanukkah was a second or belated Feast of Tabernacles. Hanukkah, for the Jewish people, and it says that, I read that myself, that Hanukkah was a second or belated Feast of Tabernacles. So you might ask yourself, well, why would they keep the Feast of Tabernacles in December, not in September or end of September, beginning of October, when the Bible says to keep it, in the 7th month of the biblical calendar instead of the 9th month of the biblical calendar? Well, the reason is because after the Jews defeated the Greeks, they had to cleanse the temple. It had been desecrated. They could not use the temple. They had to cleanse it, they had to repair it, and then they had to reconsecrate it. This took some time. They did not, from what I can gather, they did not get it done in time for the Feast of Tabernacles that year. It was not ready. So they could not properly keep the Feast of Tabernacles. They did get it done a couple months late. They finally finished it. So why did they do it in December? Or the month, that would be the 9th month of the year, or the month of Kislev. That's the Hebrew month, Kislev. And why did they pick the 25th day of Kislev to do it in? It almost sounds like the 25th of Christmas. It's not, though. It's usually a week or 2 or 3 early. But why? And this is where it really gets exciting and interesting. This is where we see the complete difference between Christmas and Hanukkah. The Jews didn't just pick this date out of the hat. They didn't just play rush, spin the roulette wheel, and whatever it lands on, that's it. Now this is where we get into the Bible. There is biblical precedence for this. And this is what I want to share with you. And this is the truth behind Hanukkah that the devil does not want you to know about. Did you know, how many of you remember that when Solomon built his temple about 1000 BC, this would have been about 900 years before Hanukkah, 850, 900 years before Hanukkah. How many of you know that he dedicated the temple on the Feast of Tabernacles? We're not going to turn there, but in 2 Chronicles 5, verse 3, and then 2 Chronicles 7, verse 8 through 9. Solomon dedicated his temple that Yah instructed him to build on the first day, or I don't know if it was the first day, but it was during the Feast of Tabernacle, and they celebrated Sukkot for a whole week subsequently. And they they did the whole Sukkot thing in the temple, the sacrifices and everything. He dedicated the temple, all that, in the 7th month, and then they celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. So, we see that the Jews, when they rededicated the second temple, remember that the temple that the Greeks desecrated was not Solomon's temple. That temple was destroyed by the Romans when they sacked, burned, and destroyed Jerusalem in right around 586 BC. But then the Jews went into exile into Babylon, and 70 years later, actually they were taken captive, and 70 years later, a remnant of them came back. And during the time of Ezra, they built the second temple. They reconstructed the second temple. And that was during the book of Haggai and some of the other of those, what we call minor prophets. That was back around 400 BC or so. Or maybe 500, about around 500 BC. So by the time you come to the Maccabean revolt, which is right around 160 BC, that's about like 400 and some odd years later. And so this is not Solomon's temple. This is Ezra's temple. And that Ezra and Zerubbabel built, and Nehemiah came along a little bit later and built the wall around Jerusalem to protect the temple. And that's the temple that was desecrated. And this is the temple that the Jews now have cleansed, and they're rededicating it. And they did not get it cleansed on the traditional time when the Torah says to keep the Feast of Tabernacles in the 7th month, but they got it done on the 9th month. And they wanted to rededicate it. Well, they knew that Solomon rededicated his temple during Feast of Tabernacles. Okay? So can we just kind of like have a belated Feast of Tabernacles in this 9th month? I mean, it's really not the Feast of Tabernacles, but it's kind of a similitude of that. Okay, just put that idea on a shelf for a minute. And let's go back to, now scroll forward to the time of Yeshua. To the one place that Hanukkah is mentioned in the Bible. And that's in John chapter 10. Let's go, before we go there, let's go to John chapter 8, 7 and 8. Where Yeshua is in the temple on the last great day, the day of the Feast of Tabernacles. That's the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's called Hoshana Rabbah. And a name that we know very well. And according to Alfred Edersheim in his book, The Temple, page 224 and forward, on the Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, in the time of Yeshua, they had this huge menorah lighting ceremony. We've talked about this before at the Feast of Tabernacles. But they would light big menorahs. They were like 75 feet tall, and they'd have several of them lit, and it would light up all of Jerusalem. And they would pour, they were big, had big cups, and they pour big vats of oil, of olive oil in there, and they would take the garments, the linen garments, the old linen garments of the priests, and they would weave these big wicks, and they would have these big torches up there that lit up, and then they would do fire dances, and this was the Feast of Tabernacles, big dances, because that's before they had street lighting and all that kind of thing, and they would dance into the night. And we've talked about the spiritual significance of that, but this was something that was really in fact, Edersheim says the joy of that celebration was unlike any other joy. He says, you do not know what joy was like unless you saw the joy that the Jews had during the Feast of Tabernacles on the last great day, when they were lighting these big menorahs and they were dancing and they were doing fire dances and they were celebrating and praising and worshiping there under the light of those flames. And then that's in John 7 verse 12, where Yeshua says, on the last great day, out of your belly will flow rivers of living water. And he talked about it being a river of life. They also would have the water pouring ceremony on that day. That was the grand finale of the water pouring ceremony, which we acted out at our recent Feast of Tabernacles. But then we go over to John 8 verse 12. And this is a continuation of the same story. Yeshua, he's still there at the Feast of Tabernacles. If you read between John 7 and 8, there's no break in the narrative. It's the same event. And Yeshua says, I'm the light of the world. That's where he says, I'm the light of the world. And he's saying that against the backdrop of what these big menorah lighting, this big menorah lighting ceremony that has been taking place actually every day, but the grand finale of it is on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. It's been taking place every day on the Feast of Tabernacles, but the grand finale of it is on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles before Shemini Atzeret. And so he's saying, I am the light of the world, and you've got all these lights here, but I am the menorah. I am the one that's going to bring light to the Gentiles. I am the one, as Malachi says in Malachi 4, I think it's verse 2, he is the Son of Righteousness, speaking about the Messiah, S-U-N. He's the light of the world. He's not the sun god. That's a demonic counterfeit. But Yeshua, his face shines like the sun. He is the light of the truth to the world. And that's what Yeshua is declaring here. If any man walks in me or follows me, he will not walk in darkness. John talks about in John chapter 1 of his gospel, he talks about Yeshua being the light of the world. There's numerous places where this is mentioned. In Revelation chapter 1, it says that Yeshua, his face shines like the sun. In Revelation either 21 or 22, a couple places mentions that Yeshua, Elohim, will be the sun, the shining, give light to the New Jerusalem. It will overpower the sun, if even the sun will be shining at that time. So the lighting of an 8-branched candelabra at Hanukkah, also known as Hanukkah is the Hebrew word that means Feast of Dedication. But its alternate name is the Festival of Lights, because an 8-branched menorah is lit. So what's going on here is, at Hanukkah, the Jews were rededicating the temple at a belated Feast of Tabernacles celebration. That Sukkot, or Tabernacles, last for 7 days, with the addition of Shemini Atzeret, which is the 7th biblical holiday, lasts for 8 days. And they had these big temple lighting ceremonies going on at the Feast of Tabernacles at the time of Yeshua, and obviously that was an ancient tradition, been going on for a while. So, are you beginning to see where the 8-branch menorah came from, or Hanukkah, and why it was done in the December, because that's when they got the temple rededicated. But why did they specify? Why does the book of Maccabees specify that it has to be done on the 25th of Kislev? Again, did they pick that date out of the hat? No. There was a reason for it, and this is where it gets fun. So, as we've noted, I believe that Hanukkah relates to Yeshua, who is the light of the world. And there's strong evidence that Yeshua was born at the Feast of Tabernacles. Again, Dr. Joe has done a fine teaching on that from the scriptures. We believe he was born at the Feast of Tabernacles. And that's when he came to Sukkah, or to tabernacle with us. But Hebraically, when a person is born, that is not when their life starts. Their life starts at conception. That's why abortion is infanticide. It is the murder of a baby. You see, if Yeshua was born, and again, go back and watch Dr. Joe's video, it's on this YouTube channel, but if Yeshua was born in the end of September, or the very beginning of October, right in that period of time, 9 months earlier, it puts us in the 9th month, or the month of Kislev, or in what we call December. That's when Yeshua would have been conceived. Now, a lot of you had a sense of this, but I'm going to tie some things together that maybe you haven't thought about. So that's when he was conceived. But why the 25th of Kislev for Hanukkah? We're going to leave that question out there and come back and answer it. I want to show you that right now that human life begins at conception. The Bible teaches this. If you go to Exodus 21, verse 22, it says, if two men get into a fight, that's another one. If a man, if somebody assaults a woman who is pregnant and kills her and her baby, it's double murder. It's murder of the mother and the unborn. The baby, the scriptures consider the baby to be fully human, fully life, and the penalty is just as much murder as if you killed the mother. Maybe they would kill the baby, but not the mother. That's still murder. That's the first one. If we go to Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16, Psalm 139, 13 through 16, I'm not going to read that, but you will see that David talks about being formed in his mother's womb, and the Father Elohim, the Creator, knew him and formed him and was aware of him. Life starts, biblically speaking, in the mother's womb. And if we go over to Luke 1, verse 15, Luke 1, 15, and also verse 41 through 44, Luke 1, 15 says that John the Baptist was filled with the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of Elohim, from the womb, in the womb. You don't have the Ruach HaKodesh if you do not have life. A rock or a blob of tissue does not have the Ruach HaKodesh. Only a living being. And then we see in verse 41 and verse 44 that when the good news about Yeshua's imminent birth, or the fact that the Messiah was coming, was told to, Mary told that to her cousin Elizabeth, Elisheva, it says twice that the baby John the Baptist leaped in the womb of his mother Elizabeth. Life begins in the womb, not when you're born. That's Hebraic thought. That's biblical. That's how the Bible views things. So Yeshua's life really started when he was conceived in Mary's womb and not when he was born. Therefore, in Hebraic thought, Christmas isn't really celebrating the beginning of Yeshua's life or his incarnation. Hanukkah is. And I'm going to nail this one down even further so you'll see what I mean. So Christmas in reality misses the mark in celebrating the beginning of Yeshua's life. However, I will concede this. Hanukkah and Christmas share something in common, and I've already alluded to this. They both celebrate the coming of Yeshua from Elohim in heaven to this earth, and that he was the light of the world. And they both in their own way show that Yeshua was the way to the Father in heaven. Sadly, though, Christmas is the Christianization of some horrific pagan holidays to arrive at this truth, while Hanukkah carries none of this ungodly baggage. So let's come back to the question, why did the Jews pick the 25th day of the 9th month, or Kislev, to rededicate the temple? Why not the 23rd or the 25th or the 22nd or the 5th or the 3rd or whatever? Why not January? Did they pick it because it had to do with the winter solstice? Like I've heard some teachers say, well, that Hanukkah falls, although it's a couple weeks before the winter solstice, but they link it to that when the day of the year is the shortest, and when the pagans began to celebrate when the days got longer again because they felt it was the rebirth of the sun god. No, it has nothing, the choosing of the 25th of Kislev has nothing whatsoever to do with pagan sun god worship. And I'll prove this from the Bible. What happened on Hanukkah is of great important historical relevance to us all. It relates to the messianic prophecy, to a very important messianic prophecy relating to the coming of the Messiah into the world. If you all go to the book of Haggai now, and this is one I want to open up and read, because you need to see this for yourself. Haggai. It's right toward the end of the Old Testament. It's not a book we turn to very often. It's right. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Third from the end. A little 2-chapter, I think it's only 2 chapters, a little 2-chapter book. We're not going to read the whole book here, but in closing, we want to read something here. Haggai, the prophet, records the laying of the cornerstone for the second temple. This is the temple that Ezra built and Zerubbabel. He records the laying of the cornerstone for that temple and which day it occurred on. Go read Hosea 2 verse, and he says that the desire of all nations will come to this temple. Haggai 2:7. Let me read this. Let me start in verse 6. For thus says Yehovah Sabaoth, once more it is a little while, I will shake heaven and earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and they shall come to the desire of all nations. In my Bible, that desire of all nations caps. That's another name for Yeshua the Messiah. And I will fulfill this temple. I will fill this temple with glory. Haggai came along because they were not getting the temple built. The Jews were building their own houses, and they'd stalled at building temple, and Yah sent some prophets to get them off a dead center and get them kind of kicked in the behind and get them motivated to finish the temple. That's what the purpose of this prophecy is. I will fill this temple with glory, says Yehovah Sabaoth. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, says Yehovah. The glory of this temple shall be greater than the former. How is this possible? Do you realize that Solomon's temple had billions and billions and billions, multiple billions of dollars worth of gold alone in it? If you go do the math, it was like 10 or 15 billion, depends on what the price of gold is at the time, but it was a lot of gold. This temple couldn't even compare to that. How is it that this temple would have more glory than Solomon's temple? How? Because Hosea is saying, or Haggai is because the Messiah is going to come to this temple.
Yeah.
The Messiah is going to come to this temple. He's going to come to this temple. The very Son of Elohim is coming to this temple. And he's going to be glorified in it. He says in verse 9, the glory of the latter temple shall be greater than the former. That's why, because the desire of nations is coming. But why the 25th of Kislev for Hanukkah? I'm glad you asked. Is it verse 10? Thank you. On the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of Yehovah came by Haggai the prophet, saying, thus says Yehovah of hosts, now ask the priest concerning the law, saying, if one carries holy meat, and so forth and so on. So on 20, let's read it a little bit further on 24th. And he goes down and he says, verse 18, consider now from this day forward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, from the day that the foundation of Yehovah's temple was laid, consider it. So they laid the temple, the foundation of the second temple on the 24th of Kislev. This began the building of the second temple that Yeshua would come to about 400 and some odd years later. He mentions it again in verse 20. And again, the word of Yehovah came to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, and so forth. And now he's talking to Zerubbabel, who was the one to do the work. Yeshua has let's tie all the pieces together. Yeshua had a very interesting thing to say. If we go to John 2, verse 19 through 22. John 2, 19 through 22. Remember he said, I will destroy this temple and raise it up in 3 days. They thought that he meant Herod's temple, which was an embellished temple. It was still the second temple, but it was greatly enhanced, embellished. It was the same temple that the Jews, that we just read about in Haggai, but Herod came along and took 40 years to embellish it and expand it and build out the Temple Mount and lavish it with all kinds of gold and all kinds of things. And they said, how can it took 40 years to build this thing or to embellish it? He's going to destroy it in 3 days and raise it up. They thought he was talking about the temple, the second temple, which became known as the Herod's temple. But Yeshua was speaking a double entendre here. A double entendre means one statement or one word or one idea that has two different meanings. It says there, but he spoke not of the physical temple, but of his body. That is the temple he was speaking about while he was there at the temple in Jerusalem. He said, I'm going to die and I'm going to be raised up in 3 days. What is Yeshua saying here? He's saying, look guys, I'm that cornerstone that was laid on the 24th of Kislev when I was conceived by the Ruach HaKodesh when it impregnated me into the womb of the Virgin Mary. It says in Ephesians 2:22 that Yeshua is the chief cornerstone. It says it again in 2 Peter 2 verse 6. And we are the temple. In first Corinthians 3 verse 16, we are the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh. As the cornerstone of the second temple, the very temple to which Yeshua came on the Feast of Dedication. This is the only place, John 10:32, where it says the Feast of Dedication or Hanukkah, where Yeshua was up there. It doesn't say he celebrated, but he was there during the Feast of Dedication. John 10:32. You can't say that about Christmas. Yeshua was there on the Feast of Dedication at the time when, celebrating when the cornerstone of the temple was laid, 400 and some odd years later. And Yeshua is not only that cornerstone, but he is the rock of our salvation. Deuteronomy 32:15, Psalm 62:2, and Psalm 89:29, where it talks about the rock of our salvation. And in a couple of those places, the word salvation is Yeshua, the Hebrew word. And the body of Yeshua was that great heavenly temple to which the earthly tabernacle of Moses, the temple of Solomon, and the second temple that he came to pointed to. And the second temple, it all pointed to Yeshua, who was conceived on this day, I believe, in the 9th month. It doesn't say he was conceived exactly on the 24th day or the 25th or in that period, but I believe that all things point to that because it's 9 months before Sukkot. And he was then born 9 months later at Sukkot at the Feast of Tabernacles. It was at this time that Yeshua the Messiah, or Emmanuel, was born in human likeness or incarnated, and he came to dwell or tabernacle with men. He was the tabernacle or the temple, John 1:1 and 1:14, and he came to tabernacle with us so that we could then become his body and part of that holy or kadosh set apart temple and become part of him, which this tabernacle or temple, physical temple, all pointed to. This is, my friends, the greater story behind the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. And this, I believe, is why the devil does not want you to know this. But let's give the glory to Elohim. Even in this secular, non-commanded holiday called Hanukkah, there is still deep spiritual significance. And as I said toward the beginning of this talk, there is, as I see, much greater legitimacy for celebrating the birth of Yeshua on Hanukkah, the real birth of Yeshua, not at Christmas. I'm not saying to go do it, but I'm saying if you were going to do it, this would be the time to do it. Amen. Amen. Hallelujah.
Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near, he is near, he is near. Yeshua Hashem behir matzov keravu yoto karov karov Yasov rasha darko leishavim machshevotav yashovel adom shem Yarbe is Yeshua Hashem behim matzo keravu yota Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near, he is near. Yeshua Hashem behim matzor kerahu